This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality.
The writer, an old man with a white mustache, had some difficulty in getting into bed. The windows of the house in which he lived were high, and he wanted to look at the trees when he awoke in the morning. A carpenter came to fix the bed so that it would be on a level with the window. Quite a fuss was made about the matter. The carpenter, who had been a soldier in the Civil War, came into the writer's room and sat down to talk of building a platform for the purpose of raising the bed. The writer had cigars lying about, and the carpenter smoked. For a time the two men talked of the raising of the bed, and then they talked of other things. The soldier got on the subject of the war. The writer, in fact, led him to that subject. The carpenter had once been a prisoner in Andersonville prison and had lost a brother. The brother had died of starvation, and whenever the carpenter got upon that subject, he cried. He, like the old writer, had a white mustache, and when he cried he puckered up his lips, and the mustache bobbed up and down. The weeping old man with the cigar in his mouth was ludicrous. The plan the writer had for the raising of his bed was forgotten, and later the carpenter did it his own way, and the writer, who was past 60, had to help himself with a chair when he went to bed at night. In his bed the writer rolled over on his side and lay quite still. For years he had been beset with notions concerning his heart. He was a hard smoker, and his heart fluttered. The idea had got into his mind that he would sometime die unexpectedly, and always when he got into bed at night he thought of that. It did not alarm him. The effect, in fact, was quite a special thing and not easily explained. It made him more alive there in bed than at any other time. Perfectly still he lay, and his body was old and not of much use any more, but something inside him was altogether young. He was like a pregnant woman, only that the thing inside him was not a baby, but a youth. No, it wasn't a youth. It was a woman, young and wearing a coat of mail like a knight. It is absurd, you see, to try to tell what was inside the old writer as he lay on his high bed and listened to the fluttering of his heart. The thing to get at is what the writer, or the young thing within the writer, was thinking about. The old writer, like all of the people in the world, had got during his long life a great many notions in his head. He had once been quite handsome, and a number of women had been in love with him. And then, of course, he had known people, many people, known them in a peculiarly intimate way that was different from the way in which you and I know people. At least, that is what the writer thought, and the thought pleased him. Why quarrel with an old man concerning his thoughts? In the bed the writer had a dream that was not a dream. As he grew somewhat sleepy, but was still conscious, figures began to appear before his eyes. He imagined the young indescribable thing within himself was driving a long procession of figures before his eyes. You see, the interest in all of this lies in the figures that went before the eyes of the writer. They were all grotesques. All of the men and women the writer had ever known had become grotesques. The grotesques were not all horrible. Some were amusing, some almost beautiful, and one, a woman all drawn out of shape, hurt the old man by her grotesqueness. When she passed, he made a noise like a small dog whimpering. Had you come into the room, you might have supposed the old man had unpleasant dreams, or perhaps indigestion. For an hour the procession of grotesques passed before the eyes of the old man, and then, although it was a painful thing to do, he crept out of bed and began to write. Some one of the grotesques had made a deep impression on his mind, and he wanted to describe it. At his desk the writer worked for an hour. In the end, he wrote a book which he called The Book of the Grotesque. It was never published, but I saw it once, and it made an indelible impression on my mind. The book had one central thought that is very strange and has always remained with me. By remembering it, I have been able to understand many people and things that I was never able to understand before. The thought was involved, but a simple statement of it would be something like this: that in the beginning, when the world was young, there were a great many thoughts, but no such thing as a truth. Man made the truths himself, and each truth was a composite of a great many vague thoughts. All about in the world were the truths, and they were all beautiful. The old man had listed hundreds of the truths in his book. I will not try to tell you all of them. There was the truth of virginity, and the truth of passion, the truth of wealth, and of poverty, of thrift, and of profligacy, of carelessness, and abandon. Hundreds and hundreds were the truths, and they were all beautiful. And then the people came along. Each, as he appeared, snatched up one of the truths, and some who were quite strong snatched up a dozen of them. It was the truths that made the people grotesques. The old man had quite an elaborate theory concerning the matter. It was his notion that the moment one of the people took one of the truths to himself, called it his truth, and tried to live his life by it, he became a grotesque, and the truth he embraced became a falsehood. You can see for yourself how the old man, who had spent all of his life writing and was filled with words, would write hundreds of pages concerning this matter. The subject would become so big in his mind that he himself would be in danger of becoming a grotesque. He didn't, I suppose, for the same reason that he never published the book. It was the young thing inside him that saved the old man. Concerning the carpenter, who fixed the bed for the writer, I only mentioned him because he, like many of what are called very common people, became the nearest thing to what is understandable and lovable of all the grotesques in the writer's book.
That was The Book of the Grotesque, written by Sherwood Anderson and read by Fred Stelling. It is the introductory story in Anderson's influential collection of link stories, Winesburg, Ohio, published in 1919.
Since Mr. Sherwood Anderson died in 1941, it may seem unusual that we were able to record an interview with him here on The Strange Recital. We've never been into seances and ghosty stuff. No assumptions should be made. We're not suggesting that he's somehow not dead. The fact that we were able to chat with him, well, anything's possible. We may have found a time travel wormhole, or some random electromagnetic anomaly shifted us into a parallel universe where everything happens in a different order.
Here's how we did it. Triangulation. Brent went to New Orleans, where Anderson spent a good deal of time in the 1920s, and I got the task of going to small town Ohio, where Anderson lived most of his life. And I got to go in the middle of winter, too.
I had to be in New Orleans for business anyway, or I would have traded you. Honest.
Lovely.
So, by opening up a connected audio channel from these two places, then starting with his name and a very personal question, the triangle was complete. Anderson answered.
So what you're going to hear next is our recording. Here goes. Okay, I think this is working. Testing, testing. Brent, can you hear me?
Hello? Yes, I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good. Let's get this thing started before I freeze.
What? Oh, yes. Sorry, the streets are a little noisy here, but at least it's warm.
Okay, jumping right in. Mr. Sherwood Anderson, we know you had a nervous breakdown when you were at the height of success as a businessman. Why?
Hello? Yes. Beg your pardon?
Tell us about your nervous breakdown.
Oh, well, I wasn't happy with my life. Pressures of running a company, employees, clients, costs, profits. I wanted to write.
So you disappeared for 4 days and showed up at a drugstore in Cleveland with amnesia.
So the story goes.
It's not true.
All stories are true, and all stories are false. The result was I left my business and my first marriage behind and started to have the writing life that I wanted. All my books came after that.
Right now, I'm at Jackson Square in New Orleans at the Pontalba Apartments, where you lived in the 20s and entertained people like William Faulkner, Carl Sandburg, Edmund Wilson. Tell us about that.
Ah, yes, that was fun. Lots of parties, jazz, flappers, all that. It was the Roaring Twenties, you know. Some people later said that I left my biggest mark by influencing that younger generation of writers, not really by my own work. Critics.
You lived there with your third wife.
Yes, well, wives. I had plenty of practice. Finally stayed with my fourth until, well, the toothpick.
The toothpick?
I'm not sure how I managed it, to swallow an olive toothpick from a martini glass, but, again, so the story goes. A rather pedestrian ending, in my opinion, but then I'm only a character in that particular story. I hope for something with more, shall we say, panache the next time round.
Planning another go-round?
Absolutely. Aren't we all? And with that, I must be going. Thank you, gents.
Wait, what did he say? These Mardi Gras tourists are too damn noisy.
Well, I doubt you're suffering too much. He said goodbye, and I'm saying goodbye too.
Shall we talk about it?
I'm freezing my cojones off here, cutting the signal.
This is The Strange Recital. Our website is thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode were excerpts from Sound Off by John Philip Sousa and the String Quartet No. 1, Opus 7, SZ40 by Bela Bartok, one of the 20th century's most interesting composers. And he was Hungarian too. Quite a few brilliant people have come out of Hungary. I wonder if it has something to do with a language that doesn't have the same root as most others. The voice of Sherwood Anderson, who we just contacted with that arcane triangulation, was provided by Fred Stelling. You may remember him as the man who no longer puts his hands in his pockets, or maybe not. Sherwood Anderson claimed at some point that he had faked his nervous breakdown, as madness was the perfect justification for him to abandon his previous life and do what he wanted to do, which was to write. Who's to say what really happened? This is episode 18022.